We lost audio.
Wait,
there we go.
Sorry about that. Well, I'll start over. There's going to be a lot of splicing that's going to happen in this one. Craft distilleries are popping up everywhere. Not all are created equal, and we're proud to bring you some of the best, and today's guest is no exception. We're always happy to bring on a guest that has a good story to tell. And everyone, thank you so much for being patient last week without a new release, but we should be getting back on track. I got to experience Oktoberfest in Munich, which was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, so if any of you brown water fanatics can drink beer for a few days, it's totally worth it. We've got next week's podcast already in the queue with Fred Minnick, and it will be available on Patreon for an early release, and believe me, you don't want to miss this one. If you want to listen to the entire unedited and uncut episode, make sure you support the show on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Bourbon Pursuit. And welcome back to the episode of the Bourbon Pursuit podcast. Just Kenny here tonight. Ryan can't make it. Ryan is doing the family thing. Wife had to work. He's got the twins, so he had to punt to me. And I think we're going to be okay tonight because we've actually got another guest on besides just Tom, who I was going to have, and we've actually got his wife on. Now, I'm not going to spill the beans too much, but I want to say thank you so much to the listeners of this show because we actually wouldn't have had our guest on tonight if it wasn't for that. So a huge shout out to Ryan Lintz and Edwin Vargas. Both of these guys came to me and said, you've got to hear the story that these people have to tell. So thanks to these listener requests, and this is the reason why we're going to make it happen. So we actually do listen to your requests, and not only that is the guests of our show are kind enough to send us a bottle of what they're brewing over there. So that was an immediate. You're coming on the show. So anybody else out there that's looking for that, you know how to get on. We're easily swayed. So let's go ahead and introduce our guests. So tonight we have Tom and Lianna Herbruck, who are the rack house manager and the master brewer and master distiller of Tom's Foolery. And Tom's Foolery is based, I believe, a little bit around Cleveland, Ohio, but I want to let them tell their story. So Tom and Lianna, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Well, good deal. So before we get into talking about the distillery and how it came to be and the origin of your stills, I really want to talk about your history and affliction with maybe whiskey and bourbon in general. So I'll kind of punt it over to you, and you all can choose who wants to talk first about how did you really get into, really liking the brown water even to begin with?
Yeah, Lianna, you want to kick us off?
I think that's all you.
Yeah, well, we've had a couple different phases. When I was a kid, I was really interested in distilling, believe it or not. As young as 13, 14 years old, I was messing around with pots on the stove, trying to figure out how I could take my dad's leftover beer or wine and turn it into something clear. And, that was cool. We had a book called The Lure of Still Building, which I think you can still get. It's just a little paperback book. But for a 15-year-old, it was full of mysteries and answers to crazy stuff that 15-year-olds shouldn't know about. But fast forward a couple decades and a driver's license and some money in the bank. And we decided to see if we could get a permit. And Ohio was really slow with the micro distilling scene. I had tried to get a permit in Ohio several times when I was 16 years old. I had no money, really couldn't have a distillery. But I think it was in 2008, we had a barn and we had a still, and we said, hey, let's see if we can get a permit for this. So that was phase one, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of like it was kind of like you started the race before you heard the gun go off, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I had kids and have kids now, and we weren't going to go operating a still or doing anything that would set a bad example. So, what I did when I was a little misguided youth definitely was not what was happening as an adult.
I did find his original paperwork from when he was 15 that he was getting to submit to the TTB. So, or was it the ATF back then?
It was definitely the ATF.
So I have it in a shadow box on the wall. It had all the, problems he may encounter, like where will he store all these thousands of gallons of cider, and suggestions and comments for getting this distillery up and going, and the original paperwork that he wanted to send in to the ATF. which they were not going to give him a permanent 16 anyway. But it was kind of interesting because a lot of the same issues of starting up a distillery when he was thinking about it at 16 were the same issues that we ran into trying to start it up when we were 40. So it was, he had it all. His mind was all in the right place.
Yeah. So I guess
when we got the permit, the business model, if there were one, which there wasn't, was just to operate a little 50-gallon moonshine still and to make Applejack, to distill hard cider into brandy and be able to sell it in Ohio on a very small scale. And we would have been quite happy doing that, because that was really the plan, had it not been for an introduction that Chuck Cowdery made. You might know Chuck Cowdery, bourbon writer. He introduced me to David and Baker Beam and David's 3 sons, and they sold us the Michter's stills that had been in the jug house in Shaperstown at the original distillery. And David, really that brings us into the, I'd say, which is the third phase, which began a really exciting foray into making bourbon, and brought us a lot of attention and a lot of excitement.
So at 16, what were you doing that you were still trying to learn? Back then, were you trying to make Applejack, or were you just doing Shine? And is it more or less just like exploratory process? Is that kind of what you were doing way back then?
Well, I was a knuckleheaded 16-year-old who wasn't really doing scientific research. When I graduated from using pots and pans on the stove, that really happened when my dad brought home a 5-gallon Prohibition moonshine still that he bought at a antique fair. And he brought it home, and, I think I was 15 at the time. And, I had been making apple sweet cider for a long time, as long as it could be when you're 15, just from trees at our property and the tractor and the little press that we had. So it was just a really fun thing that I enjoyed doing. And my friends would come over and we'd make some cider and they'd take it home. And when I saw the still, I asked my dad, hey, can we take some of the cider that's fermented and throw it in the still and see if it works? And, my dad said, yeah, Tommy, I think that's a great idea. Like every good father should, right?
Absolutely.
This was the 80s.
So I guess, what mistakes did you make and you've learned from back then that you've taken to today's operation?
I'd say it wasn't so much the mistakes as it was the simplicity of it that just amazed me. You could take an apple that's fallen on the ground or it's hanging on a tree and crush it by hand, a little press, do nothing to it other than sit it in the sun for 3-4 days, because it's going to ferment because of all the wild yeast that's out there, and take that product and distill it twice, and it turns into just a beautiful eau de vie that it's to anybody, whether you're 15 or 40 or 70, it's an amazing process. And that fresh eau de vie, if you put it on some in an oak barrel, or back when we did it when we were starting, oak chips, it's gonna mature into something golden brown, and it's incredible. And it was something that I immediately was fascinated with for so many different reasons. But to take an apple off a tree that grows in your yard and turn it into a delicious apple brandy, I think a lot of people could see why that would be appealing.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me back in my days, so I'm a huge computer nerd, right? And so back then, when I found out that I can run scripts and just hack into people's computers, it kind of led to a path where I'm now a computer nerd, right? Granted,
exactly,
boneheaded, knuckleheaded kind of teenager, but it's kind of led to something that I am passionate about, right? And I can see it from talking to you. You've grown up around it. You're very passionate about it, and you've learned a lot. So let's talk more about the current operation. So kind of talk about some of the products that you are making.
Absolutely. So we make and sell a bourbon, a rye, and the apple brandy. Those are the 3 products that are out. Although I guess we've let a barrel of wheat whiskey go, and all of it we've made from scratch. Most of it from the bourbon from corn that we grow at our own farm, or that my uncle Dud Humphrey grows at his farm. So it's locally, it's Ohio corn that we mill either through a little burr mill that we have here, or most typically we'll run it through the feed grinder So it's just, if you ever been on a farm, there's a regular implement that runs off the PTO on your tractor. We'll run it through the feed grinder, turn it into a pretty coarse grist, and then send that through the burr mill to make it a little bit finer. And so our three products are bourbon, rye whiskey, and apple brandy.
Okay, cool. So I guess I even jumped the gun a little bit, right, in myself trying to ask these questions, because you guys also started off at just a horse or just a regular kind of little thing, and then now you're moving into a newer, bigger farm or something like that as well?
Yeah, exactly. So we are sitting right now in the barn, the 30 by 40 barn that is right about 50 feet from our house, which is where our distillery is today, and where it would have stayed had we not kind of let this get carried away with what's going on. So we operated here with the Michter's stills for 4.5 years, and we sold those two Michter's about a little over a year ago, July. And that gave us some capital to buy bigger equipment, and we thought we were going to get bigger and newer equipment, but instead I ended up buying a still that was built in 1775, I believe, 1776, out of France, which is being repaired right now. You can imagine after 150 years, it's got a few dings in it, and
right, maybe a few weld spots that needs to be taken care of or something.
Exactly, little lead that's got to be removed. So doing those items to that 200-gallon still, and have a 1,000-gallon still that's being constructed for us as well. And all of that is going to go in a building that we've built at a farm that we own. It's about 15 miles east of here. We've got 112 acres where we grow the corn, the rye. We've got two wells, a deep water and a deep well, and a shallow well. And I think there's three springs on the property. So it's really a great place for making bourbon.
So I guess another question for that is you've got a multitude of different kinds of stills, right? Because we've gone and we've talked to plenty of distilleries, and they used maybe just only a pot still for what they're doing, or they've got a few column stills, and you got a bunch of little different things. So are you making different products out of every single one, or are you looking to just kind of experiment and have fun, mix them together, however it is?
Yeah, great question. I think that when people talk about stills, it's really helpful if instead of using column and pot, people think in terms of batch or continuous, because most bourbon is made in a continuous still in Kentucky, fast, efficient, works well with the grain and process that we have to use for bourbon. We use exclusively batch stills, and the reason I distinguish between batch and pot is it makes it more clear. So sometimes people will refer to a still being a hybrid still, and that could be a pot with a series of plates or columns on top of it. But really all that does is create additional rectification, and what it is it's a pot where you have more plates that create rectification. And the reason I distinguish between them is because the pot still, whether it's got some plates or not on top of it to increase rectification, will require that you distill in a batch where you can do heads cuts and tails cuts, and the pot will boil for 4 to 10 hours, and that reactive process will create different flavors that you don't get in a continuous still. But to answer your question, which was really probably needed a simpler answer than I gave, we have a lot of different pot stills. I think maybe we've used 10 different ones that range from the old moonshine stills to Portuguese alembic still to the Michter's whiskey stills, and most recently we'll have a custom still, a cognac still. And I'm pretty confident that based on the speed and the number of times that we distill, we can produce a good product off of any of those pieces of equipment.
I even think another question I forgot to ask is, so when did you all really start getting into the business of it? I know you've been a hobbyist and maybe making on the side, maybe not selling it. I'm not going to say anything, but when did you really kind of get into having the Tom's Foolery brand?
Leanne, you do all the books, so why don't you comment on the business aspect of when did we become a business?
When we started selling it, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, from dollar one. It is a capital intensive business, and once we had our life savings into this hobby, we said we better figure out how we're going to get our life savings back. So we made darn sure that a product that we made was not only high quality, but something that would be marketable, and there would be demand for it. And so we did everything that we could to make an authentic craft pot distilled, double distilled bourbon from scratch that we thought consumers, fans, fanatics would really not only enjoy the taste of, but would be, like the story behind it.
So I think that's going to bring us to our next segment, really kind of talking about the bourbon itself, right? Because is everybody can look at Wikipedia and you can see the rules of what technically makes bourbon, and it's always a misnomer what people always think. They said, oh, it has to be from Kentucky to be called bourbon, when actually in fact it doesn't. So kind of talk about your bourbon, what you're doing differently. You're the first bottled and bond that's coming out of Kentucky in 50 years, I believe, something like that. So kind of tell us that story.
Yeah. So our bourbon is different than most bourbons that you'll taste, primarily because it's made in a pot still. And without romanticizing a pot or the pot still, or saying that it's going to create something phenomenal or the only good bourbon, that's not the case. But it will create different flavors. It'll create different flavors because you can do a heads cut, you can do a tails cut, and the product does sit there and boil twice for 4 to 8 hours, and it changes the flavor. We also are aging in a colder climate, and that will change flavor as well. So,
because you guys are considered what's called the snow belt, if I'm not mistaken, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Did you have a chance to taste the bourbon we sent you?
I've actually got a pour of it right here next to me. Yeah. So right. It's open. Me and Ryan actually came over. We tasted it. And I'll go ahead and give a shout out to Ryan Lentz as well, because he also sent me a sample of the Applejack, as well as a sample of the weeded barrel that you had talked about a minute ago as well.
Nice. Oh, nice. Good stuff. Yeah, that went to the cork and bottle, I think.
Yeah. Ryan came and helped me bottle all that. So at least the apple. So.
He's a good guy.
He is a very good guy.
All right. So I didn't want to talk, just steer it away. So kind of talking more about the bourbon and the history behind the bottled and bond and what you're doing.
Yeah, so the bottled and bond for us was just a natural extension. All we had to do is be patient enough to wait 4 years and take our product and stick it in a bottle, because everything we make is bottled and bond. In that we're in bond and we make it from scratch. We're not buying anything from other distilleries. We're not using Nutri-Grain spirits or adding flavor. But I was passionate about the idea of making a bonded bourbon really for quite a while. I snagged the domain Bonded Bourbon maybe about 5 years ago, just because I thought, hey, this is going to catch on, just like single malt caught on in Scotland. I think that a more narrow definition of the bottled and bond bourbon, bonded rye, bonded Applejack is going to really start to get fans excited. And, there's a great history behind that act, that act of 1897, which was really the very first consumer protection act in the country. And when it was created really to protect consumers against all the adulterated bourbons that are out there. I don't think we have to worry about that now, but it's a really cool part of history. And for us, we were just excited to be able to participate in that piece of bourbon history by releasing a bonded bourbon. I'm really glad we did, because it brought us some attention.
Yeah, I think it has as well, right? I mean, because the word bourbon, I think, is right now it's the hot thing. Everybody wants to kind of be, have more of it, whatever it is. And there's so many craft places that are popping up, but you kind of have an eye for this a long time ago. As I said, craft places are starting to pop up, but they're not going to have a bourbon to market, as you said, for a few more years, right? And not only that is you're hopping on the bottled and bond train, which some people, you can take it however you want, but a lot of people are like, they want something that's over 90 proof, right? Because some people think that a little bit less than that, you might be watering it down, not getting as many flavors out of it. So I think you guys are on the right track. Lianna, I'm gonna push this question over to you. Kind of talk about your aging process in your rack houses.
Well, I do all the barreling, so I've had a couple of very, very cold winters where I was out there in snow hats and gloves trying to fill barrels with a pump that wasn't wanting to do what I wanted it to do. But
how cold's it get out there?
It was, what was it, -20?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unheated and left to the elements of Mother Nature. So, but we made a decision pretty early on that we didn't want to release anything that hadn't been aged at least 2 years. So once we started this process, particularly with the whiskeys, we knew it was going to have to sit out there for 2 years, but we thought waiting until we had a product that was a straight product would mean something to people in the bourbon world. It might not mean something to everybody, but it was an important line for us. And then beyond that, then we started seeing that, hey, this stuff's 3 years and this stuff's 4. We have stuff that's almost 5 years old now, which and every time,
is a big deal.
That's a big deal. And every time we taste something from one of those barrels, it's just getting better and better. Yeah. And I don't know, I've heard that there's like a limit to how long you should age bourbon. Like
I say 8 years is perfect, but
we'll see. But,
everyone has a secret recipe, right? And I think you're going to find yours as the longer those barrels age and however long you can actually hold on to them, right? Because
right, exactly. So, and it's part of the reason why we needed to make this move really is because we filled up our rack house, filled the space. We couldn't put any more barrels in there. So it was a good problem to have, but in order to keep growing the company, we needed to move, get some more space, have more places to put the lovely barrels. But I love the rack house.
So kind of talk about how many barrels you have aging at this current moment.
Let's see. Our top number, I think, was about 450.
That's a lot.
Yeah. For
the backyard.
Yeah, for the backyard.
Well, now you can start teaching your kids how to roll them, right? Or anything like that.
Exactly. Yeah. We put them to work. And we're probably at around, I don't know, 390.
Something like that.
Now, 390 out there. There's a little more space to move, which then we're like, shoot, we should have those stills back. But we don't, so we have these other ones. I forget where I was going with my line of thought.
Tell them how you get the whiskey from the distillery to the rack house.
From the distillery to the rack house, we collect everything in our 55-gallon totes, and then we have I call Tom MacGyver because he can configure anything to do anything that we need. But we have a little contraption on the back of the tractor, and we strap the tote onto the tractor, and then we drive the tractor out to the rack house.
It's probably connected with a bunch of rubber bands and paper clips and duct tape, something like that.
It's actually strapped on very securely. There's a lot of work in those barrels. We've never lost one. But part of that workaround, getting the tractor and it was just to manage the snow, because we are in an area where we'll have 3, 4, 5 feet of snow. It's insane, and to be able to manage surviving a January and February through this process, you need equipment that's gonna drive no matter what snow we have.
But with the cold temperatures, I think the theory of the oxygenation with the cold temperatures, whereas in the heat of the summer you get the evaporation, and in the cold temperatures you get more of the oxygen into your spirit, which we think it definitely gives it its Northeast Ohio stamp, but I think it adds something to the whole character of the spirit in general, and it gets mighty cold. So
I would think so. Yeah, that's what I was saying. We got the hot summers and cold winters. You've got the really cold winters and pretty decent summers, right? So you're not.
Yeah, it can get pretty upper 90s for a couple weeks. So that's when it really smells good out there.
Right. Oh, I could imagine. So I guess another question to kind of throw your way is, so you said that you did a wheated barrel at one point, and there's a lot of whiskey lovers out there, and they always say they love their wheaters. So is there an idea of expanding the line to do that, or is it just kind of a one-time thing? And you said, no, that was fun, but I think we're going to stick to what we do best.
Yeah, we're going to stick to what we do best with regard to the formula. We make one barrel at a time, but what I mean by that is when we make a barrel, we start with roughly 800 pounds of grain, and that 800 pounds of grain goes through the cooker, into the fermenter, into the beer still, and all the way through the process to produce one barrel of whiskey. And so we can change the mash bill or the formula for every barrel that we make. And so we took a lot of liberty in making our whiskeys with the knowledge that we could always blend them later on. You know, people strive for consistency, and I think consistency is important. But rather than striving for consistency of flavor, what we were striving for is consistency of quality. And we wanted to go ahead and use different mash bills. So we would use a lot of different types of malt, a Vienna malt, a honey malt, different types of pale malts in the bourbon. We throw some wheat in some of the bourbon. But for our wheat whiskey, we went all the way and made that 100% wheat. And so the mash bill for the wheat whiskey we made was 75% raw wheat. That's just plain wheat grain, and 25% wheat malt. So if somebody really wants to know what wheat tastes like, it's a really great example of what distilled wheat tastes like when it sits in a barrel for, I think that was about 3 years old.
And at the time we were certified organic, which we went through that process for about a year. And then that was a lot of paperwork. And but those barrels were all made organic. You can't really label them that way anymore. But so it's there. We have a few organic bourbon and rye as well, but all the wheat was made through an organic process. So that's kind of cool, but we can't really label anything. Huh?
So I guess another question I'll throw to you is the name of the brand itself, Tom's Foolery, right? So kind of talk about how you came up with the name, what it means to you, and all those things.
Well, I came up with the name. Tom was wanting to go with something very, very serious.
What was it?
Western Reserve Distillers.
Ohio Distilling Company.
Ohio Distilling Company. And to me, this whole thing was all about his passion and his love of this whole process and the natural process, the mechanical, the whole thing. And it was, I thought, and I'd be, there's Tom fooling around the barn again. He's out there tinkering around doing his thing. And I just wanted to always remember that it was a passion, a fun hobby. You know, now it's a business, but to always bring it back to that, like where it started, where it came from. Because if we lose that part of it, you know, it might not be worth doing it anymore.
Right.
So just to bring it back to the pleasure and the joy and the excitement of doing it and sharing it with others. So that's sort of where the name came. I just want to keep it fun.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So we also had another question from Ryan. He kind of wanted to pose it. And he said, is there any updates on the new gift shop, the new distillery that you can talk about? Because from when you go to your website and it says that you guys aren't open for the public yet, but hoping to do that soon.
Yeah, everything is still, it's baby steps and manageable steps for us because, the whole thing is driven solely by us, and Tom has a day job. So it's a lot of work. So we're keeping it at a manageable pace, but we have the building, we have the still coming, we have the well in, the septic's going to go in soon. Two wells. So yeah, we had to start from basic infrastructure, which we knew nothing about that, and we're trying to contract everybody out ourselves. So doing all the legwork, but it's coming along, and I think actually we're gonna go try and clean it all up and
So we're in the permitting process now.
Yeah, we're in the
right?
permitting
I'm
process.
Anticipating we'll have our second DSP permit by the end of.
Yeah, we're about a mile
January.
outside of the non-contiguous premise delineation that the TTB has set up. So we had to apply for a whole other DSP for the new property. So we need to wait for that to come through. But once it does, we'll be closer to, and once we have a bathroom, we'll be closer to having people out.
It's a little important, I think.
Yeah. So
Especially you're going to have a handful of visitors.
I'm hoping. So it's, and we've cut The property is beautiful, and we've been out there. We've made about a 5K's worth of paths through the woods and around the springs, and hopefully it'll be a place where people would want to come and walk and see the cornfields and just enjoy the property as well as see what we're doing, and hopefully buy a bottle while they're there. So it's all moving forwards, but every time we try and come up with a timeline, then we're like, oops. So still working that direction though. It's coming together.
But we're glad we started here on the property, because
yes.
we have all this, the fact that the new property is taking longer to develop is, that's, an annoyance, and it's more expensive than we thought. But the good news is we got a bunch of whiskey that's getting older every day, and tastes pretty good. So we're really glad we started here. I mentioned the water system out at the new place. We did sink two wells, and one of the wells is 340 feet, which is pretty deep. We went that deep because we were able to punch into a limestone aquifer that was down below several different permeable or non-permeable layers. And so we have a well that goes down there, can draw this iron-free, mineral-rich water out of the aquifer. And it's great. So I'm pretty confident that that's going to be good for making whiskey. Unfortunately, it doesn't come out as fast as you want. So we have a second well that's maybe at about 140 feet that provides plenty of water for running equipment and wash downs and condensers and that type of thing.
Well, awesome. So it's great to know more about your operations. And you had talked about the bottling a little bit before, and there's actually a question from somebody else on Twitter from his name is Brian Harkless. And he says, I've seen two different colors of wax for the bottled and bond. And he said he has white, and I've got like this. And for anybody that's listening, and if you subscribe to being a Patreon listener, I sent the link out so you can actually watch this being recorded, showing my bottle right now. And I've got like almost like a copper color to it. So he wanted to know, is there any differences? Or is it just like the color of wax that you just happen to have that day?
Well, our regular bourbon, our straight bourbon is that copper color. So when we went to the bonded bourbon, we're like, well, we'll use the copper, of course. And it was actually our distributor, Craft Wine and Spirits down in Maryland. They're like, hey, maybe you should use a different color wax. How about white? And we're like, okay. So, and then when we put the bottles side by side, it was, maybe if they're on a shelf together, it might be a little hard to tell them apart. So we just switched the wax up so you could tell the difference between the bonded product and the regular product. So
the white's a little hard to open though.
White's a little hard to open.
The wax is it's stiffer. So it's funny, these little technical things you might take for granted, but they really make a difference.
They do.
And we do take some liberties with wax colors, and sometimes we'll mix it up, or we're bottling up for who was that? Chicago. We're bottling up 2 barrels of bourbon and a rye.
Yeah.
And we're doing them at the same time, so we had 2 wax pots going, and I was like, hey, well, let's do a multicolor. And so we were messing around with the wax, dipping in one color and then drizzling the other color on top of it. And I did comment to my wife. I said, Lianna, I hope these guys aren't going to be mad that these are all messed up. And what did you say? You said, we're craft, damn it.
Well, and I think when Ryan Lentz was out helping me bottle the Applejack that he probably sent you, the Cavs had just won the championship, and I happened to have wine and gold wax, so we waxed those bottles in wine and gold for I know
you gotta support the home team, right?
So it's kind of fun. We get to play with the wax a little bit, but we were trying to settle on the white for the bonded products just to set them apart from their straight products.
Yeah, but I think Chicago's going to be happy because I handpicked those 2 barrels myself.
Yes,
I think they were really dynamite.
Well, fantastic. So I guess the last question I'll kind of pose to you, is there any states where you haven't been distributing to yet, or is there some markets you want to get to, or most people that they're hearing this, they want to go out and try to find a bottle? Is it pretty readily available in most states at this point?
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, we're actually not looking to expand distribution right now. K&L Wines in California, they'll send to anybody. Binny's in Chicago, they'll of course mail out. Cork and Bottle, they've got some stuff of ours. Lincoln Road, Party Source, Lincoln Road,
and Hattiesburg. We're in New Jersey,
Maryland,
DC,
and Ohio.
and Ohio.
And with those states, we're kind of, we have a limited amount of inventory, and so we really want to make sure that the distributors that have carried us and the restaurants that have put us on their menu aren't getting shortchanged. So we're probably, we're not going to expand distribution. We're going to try to work on our Ohio market and really try to make sure we service the people that have already committed to us.
Well, that's awesome, because every single one of those stores you just said, K&L, Benny's, all of them are always known for having large selections as well as really good barrel picks. So I think you're in the right stores already. So last question I'll throw to you all, and feel free to kind of be creative as you want, right? So what do you all really think that makes your product more or less, I wouldn't say less, but what makes it unique compared to other kind of bourbons or kind of other craft whiskeys that are on the market today? And I will say that I'll give you kind of a thumbs up, saying that, you didn't just start a year or two ago. You've already been at it. You've got 4-year-old bourbons. So you've got a much better product out there than some of the other craft ones that I already have today, just because age does bring character and flavor over time. But if you have anything else to add, please do.
Go ahead. We might have different answers.
No, you go.
Well, this was it last night we were bottling, or 2 nights ago? Two nights ago, we were, Lianna and I were out here bottling late, trying to rush an order. Sunday night. And, I said to Lianna, gosh, if the consumer actually knew what went into this, they would really, really be excited about it. Because the bottle that we were, just like every bottle, we milled the corn, we grew the corn, we milled the corn, we pitched the yeast, we pulled the back set, we cleaned the still, we did the cuts ourselves. We aged it in, full 53-gallon barrels, and we tasted it along the way, which was a really fun part of it. And if somebody's interested in pot distilled traditional sour mash bourbon or rye whiskey, we got it. And there's nothing commercial or big about us. Maybe there will be someday, but I'd say what makes us different is if somebody's interested in craft, we've got craft. If somebody's interested in quality, we really made sure that we have quality in the bottle. What do you think?
Yeah.
How are we different?
Well, I was thinking of the same story.
Besides, as you said earlier before you actually started recording, that you two are the people that do everything from sweeping the floors to bottling to barreling to doing everything like that, right? So.
Yeah. We do have some help. We got Lorelei helping us with sales, and another guy, Joe, who's helping us try to figure out how to get our stuff in more stores. You know what? I know that we're at the end here, but I'll tell you, I was a little bit surprised when we're the second distillery in Ohio since Prohibition. I thought that Ohioans were going to be really excited to have a authentic craft bourbon made here. And what I found is that the demand is in California and Chicago and out east. The coasts really are a little bit more passionate about craft, and Kentucky as well, by the way. So we are down there. Hopefully Ohioans catch on, because I really want to serve our local market.
I think they will. I think I can tell you from looking at the statistics of listeners that actually listen to the podcast, I think Ohio is in the top 8 states for actually listening to the podcast. So don't worry. I think you're gonna get into some more ears tonight. So.
Well, the more we get out, we've been doing more events in the last 2 months than the last 8 years, and people are like, "What? You're from Chagrin Falls?" Like, I mean, we are not good marketers.
No, but people find us. Every non-Ohio state that we're in, they called us.
Yeah.
And I've also loved the fact that we've had some really prominent visitors come up and stay with us from the big distilleries in Kentucky. We had one master distiller come up with us, stay with us for a whole week before they opened up their micro distillery. So I find that the big guys, as much as I really respect what they do, they're pretty fascinated with what we do, because we're doing it a way that maybe their companies did it 150 years ago.
Right on. Well, Tom and Leanne, want to say thank you again for joining me on the podcast tonight. If anybody wants to learn more about you all, where can they find you on social media?
Oh, our Facebook page is hard to find. It's like Tom's Foolery Farm.
Yeah,
On
or
Facebook.
www.tomsfoolery.com.
Well, sounds good. And I'll make sure I put it in the show notes as well. So anybody that wants to find it, you can find the
We'll
link.
send you a
there.
link.
Yeah, Twitter, where nobody's full too, because I didn't understand Twitter when we were signing up.
Oh, we make good bourbon.
Yeah. We are not computer geeks, but
You can use it now.
well, I'd
It's
like
all
to
good.
thank like people like Edwin and Ryan who have been here and like really believe in what we're doing and pass their information around. That helps us out a lot as well, to have people like them that are so passionate and fun. So
Well, fantastic. So make sure you follow them. I'll make sure I put the links in our show notes. Make sure you follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter at Bourbon Pursuit. Sponsor the show at patreon.com, patreon.com/Bourbon Pursuit. If you have any other show suggestions, such as the one that we had on tonight, or if you have any comments of things that you'd like to hear, if you want to be able to hop on and ask questions during the live broadcast, make sure you also support us on Patreon. With that, we will see you all next week. This podcast of Bourbon Pursuit is in partnership with thewhiskeywash.com, a lifestyle website for news and reviews for people who like whiskey, and for those who think a life without whiskey has no style. Thewhiskeywash.com.